After my audiobook of Ready Player 2, it had me thinking, but if I downright dislike the main character, can I still enjoy the story? That is the topic of this video, and I'll be talking about that right after the intro. Welcome to the DLJonesBooks Show. I'm your host, DL Jones, and on this show, on this channel, I talk about all types of story-related topics. I talk about topics pertaining to books, movies, audiobooks, TV shows, and sometimes video games. This particular episode, I'm talking about main characters. Do you have to like the main character to like the story? It's something that I thought about when I did my audiobook review of Ready Player 2. In that particular review, I talked a lot about the main character, Wade Watts, as I went on with that book, as I started listening and got further and further in that book, I got to where I liked the main character less and less. The character actually turned out to be a pretty horrible person. He spied on people. He just wasn't as smart as he was in the first book. And a lot of the things that happened in that book happened by pure coincidence. And they were things that were done by other people. And he was just there to take the glory or the good results. But after that review, I didn't realize until I was recording that review, I started thinking, how many situations have come across where as I'm watching this show or reading the book or listening to the audiobook or watching the movie, that the main character, the one that you are supposed to be rooting for, the one that you're supposed to have, that person, you're supposed to have that person's back while you're watching or reading this particular piece of entertainment. How many times is that person somebody that you just don't like, that you just downright don't like? It's hard to root for things that you can't relate to, that you don't like. So how many times have I been in a situation where I had that problem, where I was watching a show or movie and I just didn't like the main character? And if I was in that situation, how important is it to like that main character in order to still enjoy the overall product, the overall story, movie, book, or what have you? And that was something that, I struggled with and I thought about for a while. Now, when I think back to other story properties that had characters that I didn't like, there's one that stands out to me, and that is The Sopranos. The Sopranos is a show that I love that show. When it came on, I watched every episode when it came on. I've actually watched all of the seasons several times since it's gone off the air. And one thing about that show is that there was a character in that show that I didn't like that character. Whenever they had scenes with that character, I hated it. I just couldn't wait for those scenes to be over. And that was the therapist that Tony Soprano sometime visited and had little meetings with and stuff like that. For some reason, that therapist just rubbed me the wrong way. And I never liked any scenes, with Tony Soprano talking to that therapist. But one thing about that therapist is that therapist was really a small part of the show. It didn't really have an overall impact on the show, on a whole. And you didn't see the therapist that often. A lot of times you went episode after episode after episode, never even knowing that there was a therapist. And then they had like a storyline with the therapist, about halfway through the season where she was in it more than she normally is. But in general, throughout the whole series, that therapist was somebody that, just wasn't on screen and wasn't that involved in the show that often. So in that situation, while you had a character that I really disliked, it wasn't in the show enough to make me have an idea of the show, to change my opinion on the show or change my enjoyment of The Sopranos. And that wasn't a main character. Now, what I'm thinking about is, what if you have a main character that was like that? If you had a main character that you just could not stand, you hated every time the character was on the screen, you hated every time the character spoke, the things that the character did was just disgusting or whatever. It doesn't even have to be disgusting. It just could be something that just doesn't jive with you in one way or another. What if the main character is that person? Could you still watch the show? Could you still read the book? Can you still find enjoyment? I want to take this time here to ask you to make sure you subscribe to the channel by clicking the like button and the subscribe button below if you like to hear more content about story-related topics. And make sure you click the bell also so you get notified when new videos are posted. Now, sometimes there are situations where you will have a character that isn't liked, and that's the main point of that particular character. One such character that I think of is King Joffrey in the Game of Thrones. Now, this king, he was the teenage king. I think it was a teenager in the story. He was a teenage king, and this character was hated by everyone. I remember, you know, when that show was on and that character was doing whatever he did. I remember going online and people talking about how much they hate that character. At the end of that character storyline, when he finally gets killed, you know, he gets, you know, if you haven't seen it yet, this is a spoiler, but he eventually gets killed. And when he does, it was a situation where everybody was glad it happened. They cheered. But to be honest with you, I think that was the point of that character. That character was meant to be hated. That character was meant to be disliked. And the fact that you hated that character, the fact that he was disliked, you disliked that character, it added to the plot instead of taking away from the plot. You know, it made you want to watch because you want to see that character get what it deserves at the end, which the character did. And that character being disliked and hated was by design. So that was still a different situation than what I'm thinking of. On the other hand, I do have some examples of main characters that were despicable characters. Several examples. For one of my favorite shows of all time is that show called The Shield. Now, Vic Mackey, which was the police officer that was the main character in that series, he was a despicable character. He was a horrible character. And when I say a horrible character, I don't mean that the character itself, the way it's written or portrayed, was horrible. I mean that the person itself was horrible. He was a bad cop. He did bad things. He did dirty things. He did almost everybody on the show. He did dirty at one point or another. He was just a horrible person, you know. The character was portrayed well, you know, it was a good character as far as how the character came across on the screen. But as far as he was a person that was hard to like, he was a person that, you know, was a horrible person that you actually, sometimes when you watch the show and you root for him, sometimes you kind of find yourself in conflict because you're rooting for him because he's the star of the show and the show is good. But the things he's trying to do are bad things, you know. Again, that's another situation where it is by design. You know, the show is about a team of dirty cops doing dirty cop stuff, you know, and you watch the show to see what dirty stuff is he going to do this time, and if he's going to get away with it, and if he does get away with it, how does he get away with it? Another example is Breaking Bad. That was a really popular show, a really well-liked show, a show that a lot of critics loved. You know, it's a critically acclaimed show. And the main character in that show, Walter White, he was a horrible person. I mean, you can understand his reasoning behind the things he did. Yeah, he had terminal cancer. He thought he was going to die. He's trying to do a lot of stuff to make sure his family is taken care of after he passes. But the things he did was horrible. You know, he did a lot of dirty stuff. He wasn't a good guy. He wasn't a nice guy. I mean, and he betrayed people, but you know, that was the part of the story. He was a bad guy. They purposely put that conflict in the story so that you will have, you know, reservations about rooting for or rooting against this particular character. Another show, well, this was another movie that had a main character who was basically a dislikable person, was that movie Training Day with Denzel Washington. He won an award for that show, for his role in that show. And it's because he did a really good job. He really made you dislike this character. You know, it's funny how somebody you can see in a million other things can all of a sudden change the type of character that they are, and you can go with it. Sort of like if somebody plays like a computer nerd or something in a million TV shows, and all of a sudden in another show, he plays a gangster, knowing that he's normally in your mind the computer nerd, can he get to a point where you see him as a gangster in this particular property? And that's the same thing with Denzel Washington. He plays like the police officer, the lawyer. He plays the good guy. You know, in most of the movies that he's in, he plays the good guy. He plays the one that's saving people, the one that's solving crimes, the one that's solving cases. And now he's playing a dirty cop, you know, and he made you believe he was a dirty cop, even though you've seen him in a zillion other roles playing a completely opposite character. He made you believe that he was a dirty cop, and that's why he won the award that he won. That was a situation where you had a person that was a dislikable person, that was a horrible person, that was a main character, but you still enjoyed the movie. But again, his character was what they meant for his character to be. His character was meant to be disliked, you know. So at the end, when he gets taken down or whatever happens at the end, you know, you're all like, yeah, you know, he got what he deserved. On top of that, he got a chance to showcase some acting skills that he doesn't normally have to, you know, showcase in his other roles. So and it just showcased his versatility and adapt, you know, how he can adapt to different types of roles that's different from what he normally does. Okay, so now my next example, we have a character that for me, I completely did not like this character. When I was watching the show that this character was on, I kept hoping that they would write him off the show. I did not like this character, and it has nothing to do with the actor. The actor, I think, did a good job at portraying the character how the director and the writers wanted the character portrayed, but I just disliked the character. I think the way the character was written, I just didn't like how they wrote this character. I didn't like the character. And this character is Tariq from the Power series. If you watch that series, you know Tariq, he's not the main character, but he's like the son of the main character. But a lot of the storylines throughout the series, you know, he was involved in a lot of those storylines, and he was just an annoying character. He was one of the characters, like if you look at my video where I talk about my least favorite story tropes, he was completely that character in one of those story tropes. The one where I'm talking about how I hate when somebody calls a family member or something and tell them to get out the house and they won't, you know, they start asking a bunch of questions. Tariq was like that character times 2000. You know, he was the character that everything that the main character tried to do to protect him, he went out of his way to make sure it didn't work or to do the opposite, and to take it a step further, plot against him. You know, I just didn't like that character. So, and then at the end of the show, that character ended up being the main character's downfall. I just didn't like that character. The part where it comes into play the most is now they have Power Book 2, which is a spinoff of the Power series, and Tariq is the main character that I hated from the first series. He is now the main character. So now I'm watching this show, and I like the show. I'm enjoying it. I'm watching every episode as it come on. But I just don't like Tariq. You know, every time I watch the show, I wish that they would have made the show based on a different character, because I don't like his character. But I'm forced to watch the show where the main character is somebody that I don't like. And that's probably the closest example of my question of this series. Can you still like a show if you completely dislike the main character? And this show is the epitome of that question, because I do like the show and I completely dislike the main character. I mean, the actor does his job. He's good. I think he's good in his role, but I just don't like that character. I dislike the character. And it's not because the character is supposed to be disliked, because he just is a despicable character and the writers wrote the character to be a dislikable character. I just don't like the character, you know. I don't like the choices that they made with the character. I just don't like the character, but I'm still watching the show because I do like the show, you know. But how far is that going to take me? You know, how can I continue, like if this show go into several seasons, could I continue to ignore the fact that I dislike the main character and still watch several seasons of this show? I don't know. It's a question, you know, and I'm curious, what do you think about that? How is it with you? If you completely dislike the main character, does that completely turn you off from the show or the book or whatever medium it is that character is in? Or can you push through? Can you still enjoy liking the main character? Even though you dislike the main character, can you still enjoy the show? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I'm curious to hear how other people feel about that, or if they have examples of situations like that for them where they dislike the main character so much that they either stop watching the show, stop reading the book, or whatever the case may be, or they still push through and still enjoy the medium, you know, even though they dislike the main character. Leave that in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And that takes me to the end of the video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.